All right, so today we are undertaking a deep dive. We're going straight into the mind of Emil Cioran.
And this is, well, it's not going to be a walk in the park.
No, definitely not.
Mm.
This is an intense intellectual journey with the Romanian essayist and moralist. He's known for these incredibly profound, pessimistic, but also brilliantly lucid reflections on existence.
It's a really essential exploration if you want to quickly grasp what radical anti-idealism looks like. Our main source today is his 1949 work, The Book of Decomposition.
Which is really a foundational text for him.
Absolutely. It's where he lays out his most stinging critiques of human nature. We're also pulling from some other excerpts that sort of define his life and his core philosophy.
Right, and our mission here isn't just to, summarize a few quotes. We want to understand the mechanics of his worldview. Like, what actually drives human violence? Why does he believe that any action is fundamentally futile? And what kind of freedom, if you can call it that, comes from accepting the complete uselessness of it all?
And his background really frames this. He was born in Romania in 1911, studied philosophy. His thesis was on Henri Bergson.
Oh, wow. Bergson. That's all about creative evolution, the élan vital.
Exactly. And he rejected it completely. He found it bloodless, naive, said it totally ignored the tragic dimension of life. So he moves to Paris in 1937, switches to writing in French, and that's when we get these masterpieces of despair, like syllogisms of bitterness.
So you have a thinker who starts in academic philosophy, finds it too tame, and then decides to use language like a scalpel to just cut away every single comforting illusion we have.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Progress, spirituality, purpose. It's all on the table. It's challenging stuff, for sure, but it is so invigorating when you start to see the patterns he's exposing.
Absolutely. We're really looking at the source code of ideological violence, the internal chaos that drives and ultimately ruins civilization itself.
Okay, so let's unpack his core argument about fanaticism. Cioran makes this really powerful distinction between an idea itself and what we do with it. He claims that any idea is initially neutral. It might even be perfectly logical. But the second a human being grabs hold of it, that's when everything changes.
That's when we vitalize it. We inject it with our own, as he puts it, flames and lunacy.
Flames and lunacy. I love that phrase.
And he says you see this total transition from logic to what he just starkly calls epilepsy. It's this pathological adoption of a concept.
So the idea stops being a tool for understanding.
And it becomes a mechanism for domination, for controlling the world around you.
Which leads right into his view of history. If ideas become these obsessions, then history is just a parade of false absolutes.
Yes, we're just constantly scrambling to replace one god with another. We get rid of religion, and then we immediately start worshiping the nation or class or race or even something as abstract as the goddess of reason.
So the religious impulse never actually goes away.
Not at all. It just finds a new target for its energy. And Cioran says this desire to adopt a false absolute is precisely what breeds atrocity. The alarm bell for him rings when devotion becomes indecorous.
Tell us more about that indecorous love, because it seems to be the turning point where a thinker becomes a persecutor.
Precisely. Cioran's point is that a person who loves their god or their ideology indecorously will immediately try to force everyone else to love it too.
Or destroy them.
Or destroy them. The conclusion is terrifyingly simple. The danger is losing your faculty of indifference. The moment you can't look at two opposing sides and say, well, maybe neither is completely right.
You become a potential killer.
You're a potential killer.
It's just a psychological analysis of zealotry. The real villains in Cioran's world are the architects of orthodoxy, the people who establish that sacred difference between the believer and the heretic.
And he draws this deliberate, really startling parallel. He says the excesses of the Spanish Inquisition are functionally no different from the terror caused by an obsession with the goddess of reason.
Or race. The idea is just a placeholder for the violence.
The idea is just the excuse. And that's why he elevates the skeptic. The person who is full of doubt, the Hamlet type, or even better, the Pyrrhonist. They never cause any harm.
Because they're too busy questioning their own convictions to demand conviction from others.
Exactly. So the skeptic, the misfit, the aesthetician, in his view, they are the true benefactors of humanity.
Because they destroy partisanship by analyzing the delirium within themselves, not just pointing it out in others.
Right. And it leads to that provocative choice he offers. He'd feel much safer next to a Pyrrhon, someone committed to pure doubt, than next to a St. Paul.
The ultimate figure of conversion and unleashed sanctity. The soft wisdom of doubt over the hard certainty of the prophet.
And if the fanatic is driven by that certainty, we have to look at where that drive comes from. The the sleeping prophet that he says is inside all of us.
Right. A prophet sleeps in every man, and when he wakes up, evil in the world increases a little more.
It's that desire to preach, to fix things, to propose solutions. That's what exhausts society. He calls the political world a hell of saviors.
A hell of saviors, wow. And you said earlier, this instinct is rooted in a fundamental flaw, right? This unconscious belief that we're the center of everything, the cause and result of time itself.
Exactly that. Our inflated ego is the engine of all collective destruction. Cioran argues that every single action, from just breathing to creating huge metaphysical systems or political movements, it all springs from an illusion about our own importance.
Let's stay with that for a second. Because if he's right, then every productivity guru, every political manifesto, every self-help book is just feeding this core delusion that we matter immensely.
Nice.
So what happens if we actually perceived our own insignificance? If that cold cosmic comparison was always just there in our minds?
We'd be crushed. Utterly. We couldn't function. Life, for Cioran, is essentially a constant aggressive refusal to see our own dimensions clearly. It's a survival mechanism built on self-deception.
So without that grand illusion, we'd just be paralyzed.
Completely. You wouldn't even be able to lift a hand.
Okay, so if we're driven by delusion, why does life persist? Why not just stop? He has this paradoxical answer for it.
He does. He says life endures because death is too definite. It's too rational, and because of that, it lacks the false allure of the unknown.
Death is clarity.
Total clarity. It's fully reasoned, predictable, and therefore completely unappealing to the human spirit, which just thrives on uncertainties. Life feeds on the unconfirmable.
So if you gave life a clear, logical meaning,
It would instantly lose its chaotic charm. The earth would become a wasteland. It's the uncertainty in our goals that makes life superior to the boring clarity of death.
and this extends to our need for knowledge. This desperate attempt to structure reality is also, for him, fundamentally destructive. You mentioned the graveyard of definitions.
Yes, this is a beautiful, morbid point. When we define something, give it a name, a formula, we exclude, we trivialize it, and we ultimately destroy its essence.
It's like putting a magnificent storm into a little jar labeled Meteorological Event 4.2.
Exactly. You've killed the event with the description. He says all existence, all objects die beneath the pretext we give to them.
So the mind that's obsessed with knowing and defining is just moving over the ruins of things it has already killed.
Precisely. True wisdom for Cioran isn't in accumulating knowledge, but in undoing all of those definitions.
So if we shift from the act of defining to, well, the ultimate reality, Cioran uses this really dark lens to look at death itself. He says it's not a future event. It's the true metric that divides all of humanity.
Into two irreconcilable orders, yeah. You have those who are unaware of death and those who are constantly dying.
The first group dies once.
At the end.
Right, just for a moment. But the second group, the conscious sufferers, they are dying continuously from the moment they grasp their own finitude. And for Cioran, that's the difference between health and sickness.
Health is a sterile identity.
It's just static. But sickness, he says, is the most intense activity possible, a frantic internal burning of energy with no external movement. And for those people, the ones who are constantly dying, how do you manage that obsession? He has a kind of harsh discipline, a method to overcome it.
The only way, he suggests, is to live the obsession out completely. You have to immerse yourself in the horror, go to its very extremity, until you are just utterly repulsed by the fixation itself.
So you defeat the demon by exhausting it inside your own soul.
Yes, you have to refuse salvation and just accept the unendurable. He thinks only through that rigorous acceptance of despair can the soul actually grow.
It sounds almost like an inverted path to enlightenment. But this acceptance of suffering brings us to his most socially damning theory, the world's bestial balance.
Right.
He argues that joy and sorrow are not distributed fairly. The universe actually demands a savage equilibrium of misery.
The idea is that there have to be these tragic individuals, he calls them self-sacrificers, whose whole destiny is to pay the price for the unconscious happiness of others. They're the cosmic ballast.
So their suffering maintains the world's equilibrium.
Yes. When the collective gets a little too comfortable or optimistic, these individuals are brought back into line with misery to make sure that savage balance remains intact.
So if you're one of these people, your own joy is actively dangerous to the universe, and the cosmos itself conspires to bring you back down to your required level of pain. That is grim.
It's a grim form of predestination. And Cioran roots all of this suffering in the moment humanity developed awareness. He calls consciousness a scandal in biology.
A scandal in biology.
Nature created animals for blissful, unconscious existence, driven by instinct. And then?
And then came us.
Exactly. Consciousness is a lucid nothingness. It sees everything, understands the patterns, but it's fatally incapable of true action. It's paralyzed by its own lucidity.
So the human being is the pathological animal of nature.
The pathological animal. And civilization, all our art, laws, and systems, is just this ongoing, desperate attempt to remedy that fundamental biological illness. If being human is an illness, then happiness is just a return to that blissful animal unconsciousness, a temporary cure.
Given that civilization is an illness, it makes perfect sense that Cioran ultimately writes a farewell to philosophy. He just finds the whole project too timid.
Too timid, too bloodless. He rejects systems like Kant's as being too moderate, written for people who are afraid of the true abyss.
He basically just throws a grenade into the whole academic canon.
He really does. He has that devastating quote, "Ideas are substitutes for sorrow."
Oof.
Philosophy, with its neat little categories, is just a refuge for people running away from the actual, terrifying overflow of life. The real issues, Cioran claims, only begin once you've consumed philosophy and, well, discarded it.
So if the prophet is the fanatic and the philosopher is the timid intellectual, where do we find a model for this anti-idealist life?
We have to look to the cynic, that ancient figure who lived outside of social convention. Cioran elevates Diogenes of Sinope, the heavenly dog, as the ultimate escape from the fanatical impulse.
Diogenes. He was that radical truth-teller called a Socrates made sincere.
A Socrates stripped of all the formulas and the pretense of the city. His cynicism wasn't something he learned in a school. It was born from this extreme, almost violent pride and a deep horror at how ridiculous it is to be human.
He performed his philosophy instead of writing it.
Absolutely. Think of that incredible anecdote. Diogenes goes into a rich man's house, and the host, so proud of his immaculate home, warns him not to spit on the floors. So what does Diogenes do?
He spits right in the man's face.
Right in his face.
Wow. And his justification for that?
He proclaimed it was the only dirty place he could find to spit. The act was the ultimate expression of his indifference and freedom. By refusing to conform, he asserted his own internal sovereignty.
And his refusal to propose anything, no new system, no new God, that was his greatest contribution.
That was the point. The value of his indifference is that he was completely free from the compulsion that drives the prophet, the need to improve or change other people. Cioran sees him as a beacon, because he just was, without needing to project his own neuroses onto the world.
This whole deep dive into Cioran, it really forces you to face some fundamental paradoxes. We've explored the creative power of delusion that lets us act, versus the paralyzing lucidity of truth that stops us dead. So you, the listener, you're sort of left confronting this choice. Do you embrace the absurd futility of action, the way of the prophet, or do you accept total indifferent apathy, the way of the Pyrrhon?
And that choice brings us right back to the central problem Cioran wrestled with his whole life: failure. Everyone dreams of starting a new life, right? Of some transformation to avoid destruction.
Yeah.
But Cioran argues that the degree of fidelity to your own existence is measured only by the depth of your own destruction. So, if every grand, ambitious effort to change the world or yourself inevitably leads to failure, and that failure is what defines you, what necessary redemptive failure would you choose?
What act of destruction of an idea, an ideology, or yourself would you undertake that could finally redeem the fundamental absurdity of merely living?
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.